Hey there, it's Ryan. I am coming to you, for those of you watching this on video, from the woods portion of our non-toxic house in the middle of the woods in Park City, Utah. If you are into learning about natural or alternative cancer therapies and would be interested in hearing a less than favorable view on some quite notable ones from someone whose website is even called Alternative Doctor, stick around. When our son Ryder was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer 11 days before his first birthday, my wife Teddy and I knew we weren't going to leave anything that could get him well on the table. We've worked with countless doctors and health experts, moved away from our family and friends, raised and spent tens of thousands of dollars, even built a non-toxic house in the middle of the woods, all in the name of healing. Today, Ryder is happy and healthy, and we live more fulfilling lives than before the diagnosis. This is a revolution against what causes cancer and disease, and against what people think about how to reverse it. Whether you are actively healing and want to know all your options, keeping it behind you, or making sure cancer never touches your family, this is your revolution. This is the anti-cancer revolution. From integrative to alternative to energetic, we walk down all paths of wellness, free of bias. My name is Ryan Sternagel. Enjoy the journey. And this, like I said, is a fascinating interview with Dr. Keith Scott Mumby, who has been an MB CHB, which is the UK version of what we would call an MD here in the States, since 1970. So the guy's seen a few things. By 1990, the press were calling him Britain's #1 allergy detective. He's published a whole lot of books over the years, most notably to this program, Cancer Research Secrets and the Psychology of Cancer, and has been interviewed by the BBC and numerous TV and radio stations worldwide as a recognized expert on alternative health paradigms. And like I said before the music, this one is one that was really interesting to me. When you or a loved one has been diagnosed with cancer and are clicking around on the internet and reading alternative healing books and whatnot, you come across a lot of things, to say the least. That was certainly the case for Teddy and I after Ryder was diagnosed. As I mentioned in this interview, Dr. Keith's book, Cancer Research Secrets, was actually very helpful in this regard. And really, ever since that day, we've been rotating through a whole lot of them in the way that makes the most sense to us. That said, we try to do our due diligence, which is why this interview was of particular interest to me, as cold water was thrown on quite a few of them. GcMAF, Protocel, otherwise known as Cancel, the Hulda Clark Protocol, the Marshall Protocol, and what he refers to as fake Rife machines, all feel the wrath of Dr. Keith. Couple things real quick. First, if you were paying attention last week, you'll notice I said this week was going to be another Survivor interview with Bailey O'Brien. Due to a last-minute scheduling change, that interview is coming real soon. Second, this show is off to a raging start after being off the airways for over a year. We're getting thousands of downloads per episode, and we're really gunning for that coveted new and noteworthy spot in iTunes. Part of what goes into that equation is downloads, and the other is reviews. If you would like to give us an iTunes review out of the goodness of your heart, that would be amazing. But if you'd like to do it out of the goodness of your heart and for the chance to win something awesome, well, that would be better for everybody now, wouldn't it? Next week on the show, the person who posts what I deem to be the best iTunes review will receive lifetime access to the Anti-Cancer Revolution online conference that just concluded. 42 MDs, NDs, and health experts all giving amazing presentations pertaining to integrative or holistic approaches to cancer. Yours to go through at your own pace. If you missed all or part of it or wanted to buy it, well, here's your chance to get all the talks for free. With that, I will see you on the other side for some final thoughts on this eye-opening interview with the alternative doctor himself, Dr. Keith Scott Mumby. Welcome back to the Anti-Cancer Revolution, everyone. I am Ryan Sternagel of the Stern Method, and on this interview we have with us Dr. Keith Scott Mumby. Dr. Keith.
Hey, Ryan. Yeah, it's good to be with you. Great.
Very good to be with you. Yeah, we just chatted briefly in preparation for this interview, and I'll let you know there. But yeah, your book, Cancer Research Secrets, was, I want to say, the second alternative, holistic, natural, whatever you want to call this side of the fence, book on cancer that I believe that I obtained after my son was diagnosed, and it was a huge help, just listing out all the different things there is to consider. That's for sure. And why you would want to consider these things and how they work, more importantly, because you get a lot of these different blog articles and even cancer books that list off a lot of these things, but don't necessarily dive into the mechanics of how they work. Even something like the Budwig diet, which is one of the zanier things that you read about when you start getting into this thing. It's cottage cheese and flax oil, more or less, for people that are unfamiliar with it. But you have like the best description of how and why that actually has an anti-cancer effect.
I like to think my contribution, Ryan, is that I can bring the science to the table. There's a lot of alternative holistic people. They would just, spit if you mentioned anything scientific or medical. I bridge both camps. As you know, I'm an orthodox doctor, properly trained. I've got my boards in, medicine and surgery. So I know the orthodox story, and I don't dismiss it entirely. And I say one of the differences, of course, you noticed is that if somebody wants to do chemo, I'm not going to say, you stupid, crazy idiot, what are you thinking? It's a person's choice. But I'm saying if you do choose that route, holistic medicine can often help you survive the worst of the storm. You're not going to lose your hair. You're not going to end up barfing every day or diarrhea as the lining of your intestine breaks down. All these things that I think are worth saying. So I don't want to polarize too much, but at the same time, we're not going to waste time on the chemo story because it's out there, with big pharma. So we don't need to visit that, right?
Yeah, and that said, before we dive into it, and I'm excited for the topic at hand, but do you just want to back up for a minute and let folks know, I guess why you got into medicine, natural healing in general, but then specifically why the focus on cancer? What led you to write Cancer Research Secrets?
Yeah,
and be featured on The Truth About Cancer and all that good stuff.
So the who am I in 3 sentences? I'm a British trained MD. And you have to get a bachelor's in medicine, bachelor in surgery. So I know all the orthodox stuff. I won prizes at medical school. I was good. But already in the 60s, that's how old I am, right? Back in the 60s, I went to medical school. Already there were big cracks appearing in the structure. It was like, they called it commando surgery. And, big pharma was sweeping the board with chemicals for everything. Everything was fixed by a chemical, they thought. So I began to be uneasy, and long story short, I jumped the fence within very few years, and became a very alternative, holistic based doctor. I was particularly interested in diet, nutrition, homeopathy, alternative psychology, and all those things. Back in the 80s, I began exploring the phenomenon of food allergies, and I became a kind of world's #1. I was on TV in about 5 different continents, featuring this stuff, and I like to think I helped change the world. I had an internationally known clinic, and people would come in, and we'd explore things like elimination diets. People would look younger, feel great. And hey, within a year or 2 years at the most, I began to notice that cancer patients, it stopped. Wherever they were on the track, it just stopped. When a person dumped all the wrong foods and ate a good, nutritious diet, particularly avoiding the foods they didn't tolerate or food allergy foods, then it even sometimes went into reverse. So I began to look into this in more detail, and that's really what got me started. I used to boast, and I understand I've moved to the States and I don't actively practice here. Oh, it's way too dangerous to be a doctor here. But anyway, when I was back there, I noticed for over a period of about 10 years, I didn't seem to lose a single cancer patient. And a lot of them, they didn't lose their hair even, even with adriamycin and doxorubicin and things like that, their hair still didn't fall out. They didn't get the unpleasant side effects. Somehow we were helping the body. See, there's no, in principle, problem with chemo. It's poisonous, it kills cancer cells, but doesn't kill you. But that's only the theory. In practice, it does kill you because the gap between safety and effect is so narrow. And so once you start taking something like that, your body gets whipped into the process and it too gets attacked. Well, if you protect it from that, you can actually do a lot of good anyway. So that's why I used to say to people, you know, it's your choice. I wouldn't do it, but if you want to. And that's how come I've had the experience of many patients on chemo. Not many holistic practitioners do. You know, people go either one route or the other. And I used to bridge the gap quite comfortably for many years.
Very good. I'm glad. Yeah, I'm glad we filled in the gaps there, because I didn't really know the answer to that question myself. So I'm glad I asked. And that being so we're going to talk about, you know, something that is. I think it'll be good showing that this show isn't just all about you know, blindly cheerleading any natural or alternative therapy that gets paraded about, because, you know, we certainly took a hard look at everything, and, you know, we're going to take a look at excuse me, some of the therapies or supplements or, you know, different agents that that you have questions about, and I'm really excited to do so. But before that, there's, you know, I definitely want to get your take on the right way to address cancer. You know, your one quote from your book that sticks with me to this day is every good health measure is an anti-cancer measure. I think, like, that's Dr. Keith's, you know, whatever, however you put it in the book. And, you know, it has always stuck with me that, you know, of course, do all this anti-cancer, find out what kills this type of cancer cell and blah, blah, blah. But really, you know, you just have to be your own medical detective. That quote in particular has always stuck with me. But yeah, that being said, you have your 3 pillars of health as well that, you know, apply directly to the cancer situation. So I'd love to spend a few minutes just talking about, you know, your overall approach for someone going through cancer.
Yeah, well, there are certain fundamentals that just don't go away, right? One is nutrition. You cannot build health with crappy nutrition. You have to have good building blocks. And you probably know, I mean, your body's in a continuous process of building up and breaking down, building up and breaking down. If all you give it to work on is crappy ingredients or components, I should say, you're going to build an unhealthy body. And that's how you end up with things like cancer. You know, I have a saying, you know, that cancer is not a death knell, but it is a wake-up call. It's saying, hey, your health is crap, you're doing something wrong. And it's best to listen to it in those terms. You know, it's a message, it's a signal, it's not a fatal disease, but you've got to do something. And the number one thing you have to do is change your diet and nutrition. You have to offload all the bad foods. And by the way, there are no standardized bad foods. You know, some people do well on red meat, others don't do well on red meat. Some are really sick with dairy, others seem to be able to tolerate. You have to figure it out for yourself. And that's one of my platforms. Number two, sorry, I should use 2 fingers like that. Number 2 then is emotional detox. A guy called Dr. Hamer, a German doctor, I think he's died now, but anyway, he was very controversial, but he claimed to have about 40,000 cases where he found in every single instance, the person had some kind of emotional shock or trauma shortly before the onset of the cancer. Now, I partly agree with him. Very often, if you sit down with a cancer patient and say any shock or psychic trauma in the last 3 years, and it's so often the person will say, yeah, you know, we went bankrupt, or my wife ran off, or we get divorced, or whatever. And that part of Hamer's story is true. But what I found often that he didn't write about much was that sometimes the trauma was in childhood. You know, like an abuse case, it was all suppressed and held down, and then it finally imploded in, you know, later life, 40s and 50s. It finally emerged. So what happened in the years leading up to the tumor was the release of a much, much earlier psychic trauma. So he was right in principle, but it didn't always precede it by just a matter of a year or 2. And then, of course, the third major detox you've got to do is a chemical unburden. We all know we're swimming in a sea of carcinogens. So you've got to do something to reduce that load. It's one of my sayings, right? You don't need 0 of everything to get a result, right? You just have to bring it down to within the body's capability. So if you cut down your chemical exposures by 3/4, that's going to help immensely. If you just take a few psychic traumas and clean that up, that's going to help immensely. If you stop eating ice cream, chocolate, pizzas, and drinking soda, that's going to help immensely. There's a further degree of all these things that people should get involved in. But, you know, you've got to do at least something. You know, you've got to change something. Otherwise, you're in danger, you're under threat, and it's no good reacting by thinking, oh, well, I'm just fine. You know, I heard this, you know, this stuff is good. If I eat this, it'll chew away my cancer and it's all gone. No, it won't. Or if it does, it'll still come back because you haven't fixed the root causes of the problem.
Put the good stuff in and get the bad stuff out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit soapboxy, aren't I? But
no, I mean, it's.
I know, you know, I know what I'm talking about, right? I do get results, and these are fundamental principles, right? They're not cranky Scott Mumby ideas, you know.
And again, back to, you know, we are going to be looking at the specific stuff that you have doubts on, but on, you know, on the 3 pillars, like number 2, you wrote a couple books on the emotional side of things that I have yet to read, and the titles are actually escaping me at the moment. I should have pulled them up.
Well, I don't call the psychology of cancer.
Psychology of cancer, yeah. And so, and then what was the other one?
Well, a few, but are you thinking of punk psychology?
Punk psychology, that's it. Yeah.
That's my cheery, jokey, well, it's cheery, jokey title. It's a very serious subject. But I think it's quite an arresting title. It came to me one night in bed.
So I was just going to ask, you know, when, and again, not to spend the whole interview on it, but, you know, when you talk to folks about cleaning up their emotions and getting rid of toxic emotions and all that jazz, are there any particular methods or, you know, ways of thinking about it that you're usually kind of your go-tos to start people on, or that sort of thing?
Well, punk psychology itself is actually a technique, and I do refeature it in the psychology of cancer. The core technique I call MINT, which stands for Make It Now. And it's an unusual way of approaching things by returning to traumas and just reliving them as if now, you know, make it like right now. You're there, you're in the room, the guy's got the cricket bat up in the air and is about to hit you on the head, you know. What are you feeling at that moment? You relive it and reprocess it. Now, interestingly, some study at Harvard University came out a couple of years ago where they found that memory is in fact very plastic. What we do is recreate it to look at it. You know, it's not a set of card file indexes where you whip out the card and haha, that's it. It's more a case of, well, you want to remember that row with your uncle? Well, okay, I'll make up the story, here we go. And at the very moment when you refine the memory, you can actually alter it. So it's based on very good scientific principles that you can change the impact of a memory and your relationship to it just at that critical moment when you first recreate it. So what I'm saying, Ryan, is that there's a lot of modern psychology that says, oh, just be brave, think big, you know, walk away from it, don't look that way. It's not going to bother you if you say it's not going to bother you. You know, don't let it into your thought. Doesn't work. You know, if you've been an abused, molested child, or you've been through a war scene and watched some of your friends blown to smithereens, it doesn't go away by not thinking about it. In fact, the opposite. You know, that's what PTSD is about. So you've got to find some way to diffuse and take the pain and the misery out of this thing. And if you do it right, the person ends up with a memory. You know, it's not blacked out. They can remember what happened, but they don't react to it anymore. So these underlying traumas for cancer, you know, that Dr. Hamer was writing about, same principle. I take the person back there, and often in as little as an hour, you can really take the sting out of this thing. And the person has what we call a shift. You know, it's you can use various words, but the important point in shift is to see it from a new perspective, and you relate to it differently and new. So I consider it a very exciting new breakthrough. We'll talk more about that sometime.
Yeah, there's been man, the last year and a half, I've been on, you know, I lost my day job and I'm trying to do everything I can to make this online thing the full-time thing, and it's working out. But my book reading has taken a hit. But that's yeah, that I remember when after Cancer Research Secrets, I always wanted to read your cancer psychology book and never got around to it, and punk psychology. So
I'll send you a copy of both.
Oh, appreciate it.
Later in the week.
Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And then, yeah, and then on the physical detox side of things, again, not to take up the whole interview, but any particular, you know, ways of looking at that, or you know, particular protocols or anything like that, usually usually start with, presuming someone's, you know, either not going through conventional treatment or is already done with it, that sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are obvious things, you know, like clear the cosmetics out of the bathroom and things like that. But in answer to your question, I've got a kind of light-hearted answer, which I've been using for the last 40 years, which I call the nose survey. You go through your house smelling stuff. You know, so open the cupboard under the sink, sniff if something horrible in there, some kind of de-gunk thing. Take it, and if you can have a principle, if you can smell it, it can make you ill. Meaning, if there's enough to create an odor, there's enough to create symptoms. And of course, there are non-odorless, you know, odorless things anyway, so you've got to be careful. But the idea is to get all this stuff in a huge polythene bag, take the top and take it out in the garage and see what happens. And if you feel really quite a lot better after a week or 10 days, there's a clear message. Your whole body's being overburdened by chemicals. Now, I used to say to people, you know, one of the common questions, should I eat organic? Well, the answer is yes, in principle. But I used to say, you know, it's expensive, it's hard work. And also, can you trust people? You know, the rain in the USA now contains pollutants from China. It's coming from the sky. So you get your nice certified organic herbs, but they've been rained on by power stations in Zhangjiang and places like that.
Are they being watered with fluoride? And, yeah.
So what does it really mean? But anyway, the final part of the answer is, after talking with Jeffrey Smith, you know, the responsible technology guy, he's assembled so many cases where it's very clear that if a person just goes organic, you're getting rid of GMO and glyphosate, things like that, that it really does have a powerful impact. So what was true when I was saying it 20, 30 years ago is probably no longer of service in this day and age. You've got to make the effort to get this garbage out of your diet. Monsatan, somebody called it, corrupted food. It has to go because it will carry you off. You know, the Frenchman Seralini made this study on rats and horrified the world with the pictures. After about 3 or 4 months, these rats had huge growing tumors everywhere, and they'd been fed on glyphosate. Well, of course, Monsanto attacked that and got the paper removed, but everyone did see the pictures, so they know it's true. And of course, their safety studies only lasted a week. When you do it for 3 months, you get a very different story. So you have to take this seriously as well.
I believe those were like the 8th round of studies that they finally, they kept failing all their studies to get it approved. And they kept having to change the study and then they finally like worked out something where, yeah, we'll only test for a week. And
well, they've got the billions to keep throwing this stuff at the wall, right? Everybody else hasn't, but you know, Seralini really nailed it with that study, and it got republished in another journal, so it is out there.
There you go. Well, so that's it. Let's dive into the heart of this thing. So there are several different. It's hard to classify them all as one thing, but agents or compounds, therapies, that sort of thing that are, you know, I wouldn't say really at the forefront of when you start looking into integrative or holistic approaches to cancer. That's like the first thing that everyone mentions. But when you start digging around long enough, it doesn't take long for any of these things to come up. A little more, so interesting note, it actually takes a little longer now since Google did their latest update that completely wiped most natural health websites, you know, completely devastated their rankings, because you used to search any of the things we're about to talk about, and the first thing you get would be a bunch of alternative or, you know, holistic websites. And now it's all the cancer.gov and Quackwatch and all these things. The first ones to come up, you actually have to scroll around for a little while looking for a positive article on any of them. It's really interesting. But
yeah, of course, it's a grave disservice that Google's doing. A person should be allowed to make their own mind up. Having said that, a person making their own mind up via Google is in trouble, because there's all sorts of baloney out there, even if you can get to it. You know, people say you should eat this, and other people say you mustn't eat this. You've got to have some kind of evaluation standards. So the first thing I want to throw in the conversation, if I can, Ryan, is testimonials are not science. right? I'll say that again, testimonials are not saying, I don't care how many thousands of people line up and say, I took XYZ and it cured my cancer. How do they know, for a start? Because it wasn't part of any study. To get well while you're taking something doesn't mean you get well because of taking something, does it? And I mean, if it does, then there's 12 million cancer survivors that prove that chemo works. They took chemo, they're alive. Doesn't prove anything to me, of course, but what it means is they got well while taking chemo, but not necessarily because of chemo. So, you know, the same principle for funny acids and herbs and weird stuff that we're going to talk about.
That's, you know, on the one hand, it's hard for a natural product maker to get the funding for a study and all this stuff, and that's a very real concern to keep in mind. That, you know, they don't have the millions and billions of dollars to throw at all the research that the pharmaceutical companies do, and so a lot of it is just based on knowledge and experience and clinical experience and so on and so forth. But then on the other hand, it's pretty easy to formulate a product based on some knowledge and
based on hooey. And there's plenty of that out there.
Yeah.
Now, I've saved my particularly vicious lashing tongue around for those that it's obvious. They know what they're doing and they're faking it. They're baloney and they know it.
Yeah. Well, and then
person, you know, take an example of might have been a misguided person. You know, Renee Case, you know, the Essiac herbs lady. She just had a good idea. She did it, and she was innocent and sincere. She could have been completely wrong or got the right result for the wrong reasons. But anyway, we now understand that she was right. You know, it does, enough people have come into the frame and benefited from this that it's believable. But when you take things like the Protocell protocol, you know, where you swallow sulfuric acid and nitric, you know, stuff I wouldn't put in a rat to kill it. I'd think of a more humane method of rat killing than feeding them with this stuff. The supporting evidence is non-existent whatsoever. All they've got is people who say, well, I took it and I got better. But, you know, I know several people that went the Protocell route and were dead within 3 or 4 weeks. Those are the kind of things that I've written about and concern me, not, you know, the science is shaky. I mean, listen, the science of Big Pharma is shaky. It couldn't be much shakier, actually. But I do like to warn people off things that are clearly going to hurt them if they're not careful.
A couple prefaces to this conversation. The first is what I was just about to mention is like you said, it's, you know, on the integrative holistic side, people usually aren't just taking one thing. You know, they're taking a whole bunch of stuff. They're taking a whole bunch of different supplements, and so it's, you know, I get the question every day, what do you think it was that helped Ryder? And I said, my answer is the same thing every time. I have no idea. I really don't. It was the fact that we threw everything and the kitchen sink at them and made the fundamental health changes and cleaned up the environment and, you know, just flooded them with nutrition every day and, you know, put all of these potential anti-cancer compounds into him, most of which probably did some good. Yeah.
You did good. So you know, you need credit for that, and that's the problem with science. If you do too much at once, you can't figure out what it was, and so you've got to kind of start again, which you don't want to do. And
so, yeah, the second part of that question is, for all of these things that we're about to go over, is the overarching theme that they might do some good, but they're not worth nearly the fanfare that you know, the marketing hype has afforded them, or that they are completely, you know, they have literally little to no anti-cancer activity, and, you know, no one should consider them for any reason? Or would it be a case-by-case basis that will maybe?
Well, I think some of that for each, but, you know, follow the money, Ryan. You know, holistic and alternative health is just as greedy and grasping as big pharma. Maybe the amounts aren't in the billions, but you know, we're going to talk about Hulda Clark, who a lot of people worship, think she saved lots of lives. I don't think she saved any life, but you're talking $30,000 a time for a treatment that you can do for yourself at home for next to nothing. So that's exploitative, you know. So I would warn a person from that, because you can't afford $30,000 a visit, you know. And if it doesn't work or it recurs, you've got to go back a couple of years later, another 30,000. That puts it beyond most people's reach. And I know a couple of German doctors who I think are very good. I don't, you know, it's 6,000, 7,000 miles away, but if I lived in Germany and I got cancer, there's at least one. I'd go knocking on his door, but I'd have to have $40,000 or $50,000 to give him, because otherwise he wouldn't entertain the person. So you've got to work. And Simon Senior, you know, the man that's doing Bicarb, we're going to talk about him, but he's like, he's gone, $30,000 a time. I find that unconscionable in holistic medicine. You know, the most I ever made off of cancer sufferer was a few thousand, you know, $5,000 at the most over a period of a couple of years, because all the good things are very cheap. And if they exaggerate their own worth and what they're saying, it becomes ridiculously expensive. And so it's dangerous, ineffective, or absurdly costly. Those are the things that get up my nose, right?
I did not realize the cost, and we'll talk more specifically about them, of the of Hulda Clark's in-person treatments, I guess.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can buy a book for.
Yeah,
I read about 20 pages, then tossed it. That's a $20 book.
But
you
then
can't do anything much from the book. You know, it's a treatment plan that she would say, used to say. You know, you have to come see me to get the proper results.
Yeah. But then, I had no idea the bicarbonate IVs. That sounds like pretty cheap ingredients.
You're right. You couldn't get it much cheaper. But that's where the guy ended up. I think he got his ass busted and ended up in jail. But
being said, well, let's circle back to those. But you mentioned Protocell to start, which is something that, you know, I came across early on, and it's something that we never did. I certainly considered it, and I never ruled it out.
Not for an adult, but not for a child, thank goodness.
Yeah, and I never, you know, said I think this is crap. I'm absolutely never going to do this. I think this is a ripoff. But for whatever reason, it was something that just never resonated with me, and I learned to trust that instinct pretty early on, and it moved on. You know, I don't even particularly know a whole lot about it, other than there's a lot of blogs out there and people that say they got well using it and that sort of thing. But yeah, do you want to, I guess, first fill in the gaps on exactly what it is, what it's made out of, and, you know, how it's claimed to work, and then go from there?
It's got various names, the most colloquial of which is Jim's Juice, because it was developed by a guy called James Sheridan. And he claimed it was a vision from God, you know, that God spoke to him. He must have been on something. But anyway, that was his story. So a lot of people trust it implicitly because it's God. It's not God. It was what Jim Sheridan said was God. It's extreme. Well, first of all, he calls it croconic acid. There is no such substance in the universe. You can Google end to end of Google. You will not find it, because there isn't any such thing. It's a mixture of sulfuric acid, nitric acid, and 3 or 4 other very toxic substances. I mean, I'm not talking sulfuric acid and, you know, burn your gullet strength, but nevertheless, what is the nutritional or holistic or health worth in nitric acid? Well, a lot of people got swayed by the fact he was the word of God. B, he didn't charge very much, so you know, it must be an honest guy. He's not trying to make a fortune off this. And that doesn't wash with me, but it washes with some. But also, it is highly toxic. Now, there's a lot of fakes. Well, fake might be the wrong word, but a lot of misleading science out there where they put Jim's juice or the Protocell compound in with cancer cells, and it kills them. Well, of course it would. You know, it's a toxic acid medium. So killing off stem cell lines, or cancer cell lines, I should say, killing those doesn't move me at all. You know, I have a scientific understanding. And lots, I mean, if you just take common bleach and pour it into a mixture of, cancer's not.
Probably kill some
It'll
cancer
kill them.
cells.
That doesn't mean it's going to work as chemo, right? No more does Protocell. And as I said, I know people who've died of this stuff. It's not that it didn't work, but it actually hurt them physically. They were, they've been doing well with cancer for years. Tried the Protocell approach, and it went down like that. So it's very problematic. And when it comes to science, I've got to say the National Institutes of Health and the cancer.gov were quite patient and kept asking, where's your proof? Where are the studies? Where are the numbers? And all they'd ever send in was testimonials, and they had hundreds of testimonials. But in the end, they got fed up of asking for the science and said, all right, so there's no science, you can't provide any, it's not credible. And that's what the .gov site says even to this day. And I agree with that. I wouldn't want anybody to waste their money, whether it's a few $1,000s or $30,000 a time. Waste of your money. There's no proof. And as I said, these testimonials from people who got well while taking it doesn't mean they got well because of taking it. Actually, I've just realized, Ryan, there's a missing layer, if you give me a couple of sentences, which is a great shock to the whole. About 15 years ago, an amazing study came out from the Kerala Institute in Sweden, that if you just leave cancers alone, do nothing, quite a significant percent, 20%, will just heal naturally and they'll get well. So you've got to beat that 20% figure before you're doing anything, right? So if Protocell does 10 or 15% good, that's not even as good. Whatever you do, you've got to have studies that show you've beaten either placebo, which you know about, or what they call, I forgot what they call it, but something like magnificent inaction, masterful, that's the word, masterful inaction, meaning they keep an eye on it and often goes away. And that's back to Dr. Hamer, who said cancer really has a purpose. It's there for a reason. Nature's doing something. She's trying to fix something, and okay, it screws up, but interesting.
I'm glad you brought that statistic up. I wasn't aware of the exact number, but I always tell people when they're considering doing conventional treatment or a conventional protocol of some sort to ask if there's a study comparing that protocol to doing nothing, because one, a lot of times there's not. They don't have a study where they compared people.
Nobody's got the nerve to do nothing. Right? A, not the nerve, and B, they don't get any money for doing masterfully.
Yeah, but then other times it's like, well, this if you look at the study, this actually isn't that much more effective than doing nothing. So.
Right.
Yeah.
What they are allowed to do is active comparators, it's called, meaning you compare it with something that you think you've got knowledge of. You've got some figures or results, so you compare it with that. Nobody, to my knowledge, I've never come across compared with doing nothing. Until this study at Kerala Institute. Well, it was a Norwegian study, but it was published through the Kerala Institute in Stockholm. They were the first people with the balls to just do nothing and stand by and see what happened. And it was breast cancer, and marvelously, so many women recovered spontaneously.
All right, well, moving on to the next one on the list, and this one I'm quite interested to hear your answer on. It's your explanation. It's GcMAF, GcMAF, and yeah, the first thing I think of when I think of GcMAF is that scandal that was, I guess you could call it a scandal. It seemed to be a little more hot and heavy a few years back than it is now, but of all of these different holistic doctor practitioners getting, all dying under suspicious circumstances, we'll put it that way. And healthy guys having heart attacks and getting mugged in safe places and all this stuff. Mm-hmm. The narrative was that they were all using GcMAF to, I think it was more around autism, but that they were using GcMAF to help people. And yeah, I don't know. So there's obviously, I haven't dug into the studies on it myself, or maybe you're going to tell us that there aren't many studies, but that's certainly one that I hear a lot of more people in the professional practitioner realm, endorsing and using and all that stuff. So I'm excited to get your take on it.
Well, it's a different take. We won't go into that, controversy about mysterious deaths and so on. I don't personally think there's anything to it, statistically. I mean, how many holistic doctors are going to die in Florida in any 12-month period? The answer would be 4, 5, or 6 on average. So, just nothing happening. But my concern is the science. Now, I have a cynical saying when I use a lot, which is beware of science from anybody that's trying to sell you something. And this is a classic case. This was developed by an Italian guy and his partner. In fact, they tried another kind of product. It didn't work. So their next big idea was the GcMAF thing. And they have published studies, but only they have done the studies, only they have the raw data and the materials to make this claim that it works, that it's effective. Now, if you read what they're saying, it's the usual hypey sort of thing, you know, breakthrough, totally safe and really effective, and all these sort of emotive words that always makes my, you know, my baloney radar aerial start wiggling. But, you know, somebody trashed this whole thing, Ryan. They took their paper apart and they called up all the people whose names were attached to the study, and almost none of them existed. The universities where they were supposed to study say, we never heard of such a person. There is no doctor of that name here. So when you get to that degree of faking it, then to me, the whole thing collapses. And I don't think that we are left with any, you say some people enthusiastically support it. Not so much in Europe, by the way, because, you know, they don't make so much money by supplying the actual supplement themselves and so on. But here, you know, people making a lot of money passing out GcMAF, and I don't think it's justifiable based on the evidence or lack of evidence. The Italian doctors in question, you probably know the story, they had to do a runner, they were under arrest or the warrant for their arrest in Italy, so they zoom over, they end up in, I think it was Netherlands, Holland, and then they start producing this stuff from there. I wouldn't take it if I was even desperate. I would not take the stuff. I just don't think it's got a shred of credibility.
Very interesting. And again, so I was looking GcMAF up, and there's a few not studies, but there's a few videos circulating of, you know, different natural killer cells and macrophages and all these things supposedly being given GcMAF in a you know, and then put in a test tube along with some, or excuse me, a petri dish along with some cancer cells, and then it shows them, you know, rapidly attacking the cancer cells. You know, that could have been anything.
With orange juice, you'd wake up the white cell. They just need some kind of signaling apparatus. Ultimately, from all of our conversation here, it's going to be the patient's choice. You know, take your choice. But all I'm saying is, don't fall for baloney and, you know, the snake oil salesman kind of baloney that surrounds these things. Try and make your own mind up. But, you know, taking GcMAF compared to removing all the inflammatory hyperallergenic foods from your diet, they're light years apart. You know, one has a million-fold potential of the other one. So what would you rather do? You know, spend your money on GcMAF or change what you're eating and what you're drinking and what you're doing. That's where you should really be making the comparison, you know, not what happened in the test tube before and after you added the GcMAF.
Perhaps getting a mattress that's not off-gassing chemicals into you while you sleep. That's a good one too.
We've got to say EMF screening. You know, if I were to, well, sooner or later I'll rewrite that book, and I'll probably have 4 pillars of wisdom, 4 pillars of healing, I should say. You know, get rid of as much EMFs as you can in the house.
Yeah.
These are proven, powerful, highly effective interventions that you can do for yourself and will work. Whereas to put your trust in I was going to say, GcMAF's Italian doctors and Simon Sini's. I've got nothing against the Italians, but it suddenly came out.
Good deal. Well, going down the list, yeah. Let's circle back to Hulda Clark.
Now she is a scam artist, I think, pure and simple, and she knows she won't. But she somehow accumulated this adoring following, and it was based on her book. Now, I said I bought a book. I started to read it, just tossed it. Rubbish. She claims to have cured 100 consecutive cancer cases, which would be the biggest miracle in the universe if true. But it turns out that she gets to diagnose the cancer, and she gets to tell you when you're cured. Hey, wish I could get a job like that. She, honestly, almost none of the cases that she claimed had cancer had any objective evidence, you know, like an X-ray or a tumor a biopsy or something like that. So really, it's all bogus. Saying I think you've got cancer, and they come back a week later and, oh, it's fine, the signal's gone, I've now cured you of cancer. There are people around there do that, and they charge maybe $50 a time. But this crazy woman had the effrontery to write a whole book and claim she had got the cure for cancer, which is nonsense. And also, her science is way off, because she says the only cause of cancer is isopropyl alcohol and a parasite called Fasciolopsis buskii. I don't wear either of them, but Fasciolopsis buskii is a strange parasite that's found only in Southeast Asia. So what's that got to do with breast cancer for a woman living in New York? You know, her structure doesn't make sense. And when you throw in what I found, that report from the lady who actually went to her clinic, where she said it was, you know, flea-bitten, rat-infested, dirty, with no AC or anything like that, people lying around on dirty mattresses, I thought, I don't want to hear any more about Hulda Clark. Now, she probably survives only now because of her Zapper, so-called. And again, there's quite a bit of whimsy in that, but I'm not against the principle that you can electronically damage pathogens. That's what Royal Rife did. And we're not doing Royal Rife because he's not a scammer. But you know, it's interesting because his technology has now gone mainstream. It's just, I'm one of the very few people that's noticed it's out there. They call it irreversible electroporation. And you zap tumors and they shatter, and all the cells break up and die, and away goes the tumor. They don't think of that as Rife technology, but I do. And you can Google that, and that will show up on Google. Irreversible electroporation, P-O-R-A-T-I-O-N, poration. Lost my thread. Was it? Oh, doing Hulda Clark.
Yeah.
Well, her Zapper claims to be along those lines. You can't say she was, you know, snake oil or anything like that, because she didn't charge for it. She gave away the circuit for free. Which is, you know, good in principle, but lots of people are now copying it and selling Hulda Clark Zappers for hundreds of dollars, which I think is very, very unethical indeed. Do they work? Well, she claimed they work, but, you know, it works on the principle of dowsing, really. If you have a Zapper and it says you've got Fasciolopsis buskii, do you, or is it something that you've got inside your own head? You know, one thing I taught in one of my books called Medicine Beyond Ryan is that when these people do dowsing and electronic sensing, they're actually really themselves the detector. I mean, it's obvious with a person with a pendulum, you know, there's nothing happening between the body and the pendulum. It's an influence, and the influence comes mainly from the dowser. Now, there are good dowsers, you get very good results, but you know, the point is, if the person has got some condition, they will keep finding it. So I think Hulda Clark had Fasciolopsis buskii in her body herself, and she was poisoning herself with isopropyl alcohol somehow, you know, probably hand washing and things. So she's got it. So every single person that walks in the door, she finds it, you know, finds it, quote unquote. Listen, we're deep diving down the rabbit hole now, but honestly, I've got to say that because that's my understanding of where she got to. And I'm pleased.
No, this is yeah, this is great. I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I didn't know. I have not read her book, but I didn't know that it was one particular parasite. Obviously, you know, doing a parasite cleanse, like getting rid of parasites, probably a good idea. Mm-hmm. But I didn't know that it was predicated on this one particular parasite, and that's all you had to do to get rid of, you know, to get rid of cancer is get rid of this parasite.
That's what she said. And also, you know, if it does work, you'd expect worms to come tumbling out of somebody's backside now and again. I mean, not all the time, but, you know, people have heavy infestations. So if you really did zap them, you'd expect to see something appear on the outside. And I've never seen or heard of that effect either.
Yeah, let's jump to the Marshall Protocol, which, you know, this is one that I'm actually was, you know, I had heard of peripherally, but had never really dug into much at all myself. So it's, you know, but I'm on the Marshall Protocol website here, and, you know, there's 5 steps. The last 4 steps are all pretty avoid interpersonal stress and environmental immune suppression, such as radio frequencies. That sounds good. Avoid consumption of vitamin D. I know there's, as opposed to getting it from natural sunlight, which I know there is a lot of research saying that the vitamin D that your body makes from sunlight is not the same as what you might take in. Wean off immunosuppressive or potentially immunosuppressive therapies, and then manage exposure to light, again, depending on blood levels of vitamin D and photosensitivity. But then the first one is take a minimum of 40 grams of olmesartan, parentheses Benicar, which I looked up is a prescription drug for hypertension, excuse me, or high blood pressure, more or less. So, yeah, what is the Marshall Protocol trying to say it does, and why, in your opinion, does it?
I've not been to the website for a while, so I'm sure they're trying to moderate their language a bit because they come under such scorn. But the fundamental, I mean, first of all, this guy Marshall, I've forgotten his first name. He's not a doctor, he's not health trained, he's an electrical engineer, and he set himself up as some almighty health expert that knows more than doctors and scientists. Listen, not all doctors are fools and crooks, and not all scientists are idiots. There are some good people out there. And we know for sure that vitamin D is the most powerful influence of all in avoiding and restricting cancer. The science is running now into tens of thousands of papers. And here's this guy Marshall saying, vitamin D damages your immune system. Well, why is it called the antibiotic vitamin if that's the case? If you take it, you can cure all so than vitamin C even. So he had people running around frightened of sunlight, covering themselves up and avoiding taking any foods that were known to, like fish oils and things that were rich in vitamin D. He taught people that it was poisonous stuff and it would kill them. Vitamin D was in effect, it would kill you. And
so he's literally not even saying like differentiating between the supplement and the sunlight. He's saying just vitamin D.
All vitamin C. Like I said, maybe you started to tone it down a bit because nobody can tolerate this. I mean, on my screen right now, you're up there, so I can't sit and read it, but right there is another study that came out this week showing that vitamin D is fantastically powerful in its anti-cancer properties. They studied a high dose group, like 6,000 to 8,000 units, dropping to 4,000 units for long term. And then the low maintenance, 400 or 600 units, which we consider absurdly low. And the high vitamin D intake group had 40% less incidence of cancers, and a much better recovery rate from those that did recover. This is documented science of the kind I like, number crunching, not phony baloney science and numbers like Big Pharma. This is just an independent scientific study. But even how it was first noticed, Ryan, is just a complete giveaway. Somebody noticed that the incidence of colorectal cancer was way down in the southwest of the USA, and it was way raised up in the northeast. And some smart aleck thought, well, what's the difference? Sunshine. And that's what led to the exploration of vitamin D. Down here, I'm in Vegas, down in the southwest desert, there's abundant sunshine, and everybody gets lots of vitamin D via their skin. I still supplement 4,000 or 5,000 units anyway, just to be on the safe side. But, that was the beginning of it. Now, this guy Marshall can't argue with that. I mean, the sort of phony baloney theories he comes up with just don't bear, they just don't hold water. But this is an example where I think he's doing immense damage. Anyone that doesn't double, treble, or 10 times their vitamin D intake is fighting cancer, are hurting themselves. They are risking not beating the disease by not taking one of the number one anti-cancer nutrients, vitamin D. Vitamin C is another one, we all know, very powerful. Glutathione I'd want, but to say, no, it mustn't have vitamin D, it's terrible. Where do you think I get this crazy theory from? And now, of course, he's surrounded by floozies running their own website. Oh, we love him and he's right. What's a poor person supposed to do when you're trying to find the truth out about these things?
Yeah, that's the tough part. We talked about, we talked about Google and the censorship and all that's going on, but at the same time, there is crap, to put it bluntly, to wade through. I was not, again, I wasn't familiar with what exactly the Martian Protocol was, but yeah, to say that you should be avoiding all vitamin D is, man, that's.
Let me throw, a strong player in the frame as well. Joe McCullough. I mean, he's kind of a rock star doctor now, but he's heavily against the Marshall Protocol and wrote a very good page. There's a chance that Google will allow you to read it. If you type in McCullough, Marshall Protocol, just those 3 words, should find it. And, he speaks out against it just as vigorously as me. He's had more time, well, his research team has spent more time finding the references for him.
Yeah, he moved to Florida just so you get more vitamin D.
Yes, well, anything but the Chicago weather, yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I will say since moving from Seattle to Utah, I didn't know what I was missing in terms of sunshine. We'll put it that way. Yeah. The bicarbonate IV. So, to my understanding, and we're talking about sodium bicarbonate, baking soda, injected more or less. That's actually what it is. It's injected. And
well, you can charge more if you put it through an IV line than just give it.
Yeah, and there's, and then that being said, there's a lot of stuff you read about the baking soda cure or whatever, even just drinking baking soda and all this stuff, and I'm interested to hear what you had to say, because my understanding is he was using that as more of a primary treatment, not just, people were using a whole bunch of things, and that he supposedly had a lot of cases that got better, the Simoncini guy in Italy. My other thought on the matter is just, in general, he was operating under the cancer is a fungus hypothesis, theory, whatever you want to call it, which, I would never say cancer is any one thing, but you look at the work of, say, Doug Kaufman and the success he's had working with doctors to put their patients on antifungal protocols, and seeing a lot of great results, which I think there's a lot of legitimate stuff going on there. So yeah, with all that in mind, I'm interested to hear what you have to say about bicarbonate.
Well, the people who are doing the antifungal things and getting results, I have to see some figures that convince me it's better than what would happen anyway, with using other therapies. There's no question that fungus is benefited when the immune system is down, and cancer is benefited when the immune system is down. So it's no surprise the two would go together. You find both things quite often in the same patient. And I've seen very good results getting rid of Candida in a cancer patient. But Simoncini is not saying that. He's saying it is a fungal disease. Candida causes that. I think he's way off. He's wacky. I mean, we know there are DNA changes. Those are very significant. And, various other reasons why a cancer strain can get going in the body. I mean, we know cancer cells are there all the time. We rely on the immune system to pick them off. But his protocol of loading the body with bicarbonate is absurd. And it has actually cost a couple of people their lives. They ended up in hospital because you're trying to overwhelm a natural mechanism. See, the body wants the pH between 7.3 and 7. Round about there. Very, very narrow margin. If you take a couple of spoonsful of bicarb, you're going to send it way off and the body will drag it back down. So the best that you're going to get from taking bicarb is kidney strain. Your kidney's going to have to put it right for you as quickly as it can. Now, it all goes to a much deeper theory, which is a baloney theory, and I've got to spend a minute demolishing this because it kills people, Ryan, which is if you alkalize, you're fine, you'll never get cancer. If you got cancer, you alkalize, you'll get rid of the cancer, it'll just melt away like butter. It doesn't. And my reference here is a brilliant, brilliant man called Emanuele Revici. I don't know if you know this man. I mean, it's been said that he should have been up for at least 7 Nobel Prizes. He was so clever. I mean, Einstein said, I've never met a man as clever as this. He was smart and got fabulous results. But he went into the metabolic aspect of cancer. And without going into all his work, which would take hours, he realized there were 2 kinds of people. Those who would benefit from alkalization and those that would benefit from acidification. And they were the opposite. If you tried to alkalize one type, then you'd kill them, literally. You would accelerate the tumor. Now, figuring out which you're in is all sorts of complicated blood tests, plus, you know, do you wake in the night with headaches and feeling ill, or does it happen to you at 4 o'clock in the afternoon? He's written a whole book on it. If you can't stomach all of it, Ravici's writings, and they are heavy. There's a much lighter book by my friend Kelly Idem, which is called The Doctor Who Cures Cancer, that summarizes his work beautifully for the layman. But that's the important takeaway. If you try and alkalize without knowing which group you're in, you're going to hurt yourself, if not kill yourself. So that silly advice is at least 50% wrong and going to harm 50% of those that apply it. The other thing is you can't really alter the pH, you know, in any dramatic way just by using alkalized water. The so-called alkaline foods, it's all baloney. Those are simply avoiding allergy foods, you know, common stressful foods. You give those up. That's my whole platform. You know, you figure out what food your body likes and what doesn't. And if you sort of match up so-called acidic foods, they're all the common allergens, you know, like dairy and grains and things like that. Anyone's going to feel better by avoiding those foods. If you remove stressor foods from your diet, you're going to benefit. But the idea you can force alkalization against acidification is nonsense. First of all, everything you eat, you know this, right? Everything you eat goes through your stomach. Hydrochloric acid, pH of under 3. It would burn holes in carpets. It's so strong. So what is all this baloney about trying to change all that? You know, your food passes through a heavy acidic environment, then to a heavily alkaline environment. Listen, I believe in nature, not cures. Nature knows what she's doing. Stand back and get out of the way would be my advice. And alkalizing is a very, very dumb strategy. Eating the wrong things is a dumb strategy, but they don't exactly correlate. And a lot of people think they do. And of course, it's the old story. Thousands, tens of thousands say, oh, I went alkaline, I feel ever so good. And my cancer went away. Yes, but is it because of the acid alkaline or because of the food elimination part? Or is it you'd have got well anyway? It's very difficult to sort some of these things out.
Yeah, that's, you know, of course, you start researching cancer from a holistic perspective, and that's the key word, the buzzword you always hear about is alkaline and alkalizing and so on and so forth. And it, you know, I went with it for a little while, but it did never really jive with me. And then I started hearing people explain how there's such a tight buffer within your blood and within your you know, just within all of your bodily systems on what the body is trying to keep the pH at. Like it's obviously you don't want to be, you don't want to go into acidosis, which you know is a medical condition.
Right. Or an alkalosis. It's just as dangerous. If you get an established alkalosis, it's nearly always fatal. That's how aspirin overdose kills a person. It becomes irreversible very quickly.
But yeah, I'd say the pursuit for homeostasis might be the best way to go. Yeah. And then again, back to your point of, you know, you're eliminating you know, common allergens and stuff like that. What are considered alkaline foods are also the most nutrient rich. Like, you know, if you're eating all these different vegetables and fruits and all that stuff, I mean, that's anti-cancer nutrition right there. So.
It is basically. Now let's let me throw one other thing in. I know you've heard of apple cider vinegar. I mean, who hasn't? What is apple cider vinegar? It's a very strong acid. It's acetic acid. It has all these miracle healing qualities, but oh my God, it's an acid. How can you jibe these two ridiculously inconsistent stories? You know, people don't know what they're talking about, and that's something that's not doctors, and often mostly not holistic practitioners don't really know what they're talking about. Everybody's copying the same mistake. Yeah. Now, listen, I can say all this from a sort of arrogant point of view because I'm not doing it anymore. You know, I don't see patients directly anymore. So I can sit up here and pontificate and, yeah, the criticism. But, you know, I've done my time, Ryder. I did my 40 years of hard work and pioneering, and I got my ass kicked many times by the medical profession. Because they don't like anyone stepping out of line, you know, and especially if you're effective, what you do cures somebody, then they are very uncomfortable because they're in a position where the patient might say, well, why didn't you do that? It works so well. You're telling me it's all Mumby jumbo was one of the phrases that came up in my city.
Mumby jumbo.
The local doctors in hospital, they called it Mumby jumbo. They had to eat their words, you know. By the end of the 90s, I was supplying official stuff to the UK's official health service. So I went from quack to being respectable in less than 20 years. That's pretty meteoric in the medical profession.
I love it. Do you have time for one more?
Yeah, sure. I'm conscious of your time frame, so you call the shots. But if you want another one, what have we got? Anything left?
Yeah, fake. So you had the disclaimer or the preface on their fake Rife machines. So you did just mention Royal Raymond Rife earlier in the interview and his work with frequencies, yes, and how you can take find the right frequency to more or less shatter a target microbe, whether you're going after a virus or a bacteria, that sort of thing. So it sounds like in theory and with his work that you're in agreement, but maybe not with some of the machines that that get produced today claiming to replicate his work.
Yeah, and they don't. They're based on what are called mortal oscillatory rates. That means the frequency that will kill the organism. But that's missing out about 3 layers of the story. Okay. First of all, let me say, Rife's brilliant discovery, I don't think, was the machine, so-called. It was the microscope. He invented this brilliant microscope that enabled him to see that cancer has many forms, Bacillus X form, which is tiny, submicroscopic. And then he was able to see them change from one to the other. So that was a very, very interesting breakthrough. An optical microscope like no other. And unfortunately, he was just like years away from the first electronic microscope. So that magnifies many times more, but the catch is it has to be dead. So science has moved into only studying dead things. It won't study living things anymore. Whereas Rife had a brilliant microscope that enabled him to do that. The so-called Rife machine was simple enough. It was basically a frequency generator. You can buy those on the shelves at Radio Shack and places like that. It's not so difficult or obscure. But he was working in partnership with a guy called Philip Hoyland. And if you read the history very carefully, it's possible to suspect that Philip Hoyland was probably a crook and was trying to hide things from Rife himself. See, Rife wasn't an electronic genius wizard at all. People built and made the machines for him. Philip Hoyland seems to have some layers of coding, which sadly went to the grave with him, but they are important. There's a carrier, the frequencies are called audio frequencies. That's what you'll see published, and that's the machine that you buy, even though it's an electronic device. But on their own, they don't do anything. They have to have a carrier wave. And it's the missing carrier wave that people have just kind of, mostly ignorant. I'm not saying everyone has produced a frequency generator and called it a Rife machine is a lying crook. They're probably just humble, innocent, ignorant people. But there is this missing element. Anyway, instead of rambling on and on, let me say that somebody came across one of the original Rife frequency generator machines and was able to decode it electronically. Now, I wrote about that in my book in the later editions of it, because that was only about 3 or 4 years ago. Actually cracked the code, as it were. So the carrier wave frequencies plus the mortal oscillatory rates are what you need. But what's being sold is just the audio frequencies, and it's not enough. And over the years, I've been sent many Rife machines to evaluate, and with very enthusiastic manufacturers. They want it to work. They want to help people. I've not seen any effect or any benefit or any change from those. So be careful what you buy. But it is only a frequency generator. So if you go for something like the, what's it called? I was going to say Beamer, that's the car. No, it is the Beamer, yeah, the Beamer 3000. That is, at rock bottom, is just a frequency generator. But you can add layers, differing, including different carrier waves that make it more effective. But the real Rife technology actually disappeared with Philip Hoyland. And those that were published by John Marsh were really based on his ignorance and unknowing. He did his best. He thought that's what they were. But we're now sure that they weren't, because we have one of the original devices. They took it apart and figured out exactly what it was doing, with oscilloscopes and things. Sorry, I just hit the microphone. I get animated sometimes, as you can. But the technology is wonderful, but, you know, his entire fame rests on about 14 cases, I think it is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is a very small sample size there. That's for sure. But you know, if you can cure 14 cancer patients, you know, that
You know?
about 100%.
Yeah, yeah, it was about 100% cure rate, because
Yeah,
some of them recovered after the study interval.
yeah.
So, you know, he got onto something, and as I said, we now recognize it. It's got a name, irreversible electroporation. I just wish it would come into the 21st century. You know, everyone keeps harking back to, you know, lovely old Rife, and he was a fantastic pioneering figure. I love him. I think he's one of the great men that ever lived in terms of skill and insight and persistence. But in the end, you know, he was up against everything. Cheap antibiotics arrived within years. Electron microscopes arrived within years. The FCC shut down all frequency broadcasting if you weren't advertising Pepsodent or something like that. You know, if you had a radio show, you had to book your slot, and nobody else could use that frequency slot. So in a way, he was a very clever man, just out of time. He could never work for very long.
I don't know enough about frequencies, you know, from a technical perspective to be able to really ask too many detailed questions. But I mean, just for instance, you know, I had purchased early on the GB4000. I don't know if you're familiar with that particular unit. Yeah, and over the years, I've had just through us doing what we do, I've had people of all stripes kind of reach out to me and say, have you heard about Rife? And blah, of course, yes, I've heard about Rife. But I mean, a couple of them have been like, you know, Department of Defense scientist was one guy that that wrote into me and said, you know, that the GB4000 is, I was like, oh, great, that's the one I have. But, you know, that he reverse engineered all this and come to the conclusion that this is the best one. And that unit in particular, I know they do talk about having a carrier frequency. So are you saying that, you know, even the folks that do talk about carrier frequencies, it's still just not the right one, or?
No, if they've done their research, I mean, remember, this work has been in the public domain. A guy called, well, actually, he doesn't like to be named. So, I mean, he's running scared, you know, with the FDA, because people are being slammed in jail for selling Rife machines, never mind, you know, decoding them. I've forgotten what I'm saying. Oh, yeah, so this was published 3 or 4 years ago, and everyone's got access to it. Some American woman's tried to copyright a whole bunch of frequencies and actually sued a friend of mine for using them, which is not quite the spirit of the thing when you've taken it from somebody else. But anyway, they're in the public domain, and the GB4000 is very good, and the people are very good. So I'm not surprised to hear they've now incorporated the best of what we know. And if I was to buy a device over and above handhelds, that's probably the one I'd pick. Yes.
Well, there you go. All right. Been verified again by none other than Dr. Keith Mumby.
Listen, I don't want to be an arrogant sod. I've got strong, but my strong opinions have kept a lot of people alive for a lot of years, right?
Well, very good, Dr. Keith. This has been a long time coming. I really appreciate your work. Really appreciate your book. Yeah, again, it was some of the earliest stuff I was getting into in our cancer journey. So I certainly appreciate everything you put out there.
I appreciate what you're doing. I love what you're doing, Ryan. You know, take some gold points, gold stars, and brownie points. This is great, you know, and it needs doing.
Yeah, very good. Do you like to let everyone know where to find Dr.
If they want a copy of the book, well, let's just concentrate on the cancer research secrets. It's a real easy URL. It's www.cancerresearchsecrets.com. Secrets plural, and it's all one word, no dots and dashes, just cancerresearchsecrets.com.
Yeah, we'll throw a link into the show notes as always for everything we've talked about here, which will probably be pretty complicated for this episode. And then
I think we stirred things up a bit, but that was our aim a little bit, wasn't it? We were going to stir the pot a little bit. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Your general website, Facebook, any of that stuff you want to point people to?
Oh, well, there's a huge free website with thousands of pages, alternativedoctor.com, and that's alternative doctor with a hyphen in it. I didn't buy it when it was available back in 2003. I thought, no, I'll use the two separate words so it won't fool Google. So I bought alternative-doctor.com. They now want 40,000 bucks for the one without the hyphen.
40,000.
I don't think anybody will buy it. Well, I've got the other one. But anyway, alternative-doctor, spelled in full, doctor.com. And it's a free site with masses and masses of resources.
Very good. Dr. Keith Scott Mumby, thank you so much for coming on the Anti-Cancer Revolution.
Thanks, Ryan, and take care. Bye now.
There you go, another anti-cancer interview in the books with none other than Dr. Keith Scott Mumby. I've been following his work ever since he was featured in the original Truth About Cancer series shortly after Ryder was diagnosed. And that book of his, Cancer Research Secrets, really is quite a good compilation of holistic and alternative cancer therapies with the scientific explanation to back them up. I got a whole lot out of it. Definitely worth picking it up if you don't have it already. I will link to that along with his other books and all resources mentioned, along with the summary notes to this interview, as always on our website. That link will be thesternmethod.com/Keith-Scott-Mumby. And I'd really love to know what you thought about this one and any strong feelings you have one way or the other on any of the treatments mentioned here. I was just thinking about GcMAF lately and almost feeling guilty that I hadn't put it into the rotation for Ryder yet, given all the hype that one's got in particular over the last few years. But now I'm going to need to go give it a second look. Protocell is one that looked interesting, but for whatever reason just never fully resonated with me. I've learned to really trust that feeling and not ask too many questions over the years, and maybe there's a reason for it with this one. Hulda Clark, I know a lot of people in the natural healing world reference in high regard, so that was another interesting one to me. I have not read her book, The Cure to All Cancers. Skimming through it, there certainly looks to be some good general health advice in there. Definitely a good idea to rid your body of parasites and bacterial infections, but to say that all cancer is from one particular parasite and to call anything the cure to all cancers for that matter is indeed a bridge too far for me. I'd be interested to hear if you have anything positive to say about the Marshall Protocol. Anything that discourages vitamin D in all forms, that's going to be a pretty tough one for me. And with the Rife machine thing, this is one you can ask 100 different people about and get 100 different opinions. I'm glad we picked the machine itself that made Dr. Keith's probably okay list, as it does with most folks, but there are sure a lot of them out there, and with this sort of thing, it's really hard for a layman like me to really say I know anything for 100% certain. So again, would love to hear your thoughts on all of it in the comments on the website or YouTube. And again, speaking of comments, don't forget to leave that review for your chance to be the proud owner of lifetime access to the Anti-Cancer Revolution online conference. We had so many people telling us it was the most helpful thing they'd ever seen pertaining to holistic healing, so I'm confident in saying it's a good prize to shoot for. That's all for me. One more time, I am Ryan Sternagel of the Stern Method. God bless, Godspeed, and as always, if you are going through cancer, one approach we can all agree on is to just keep going.